Farmer finds injured old woman protecting a baby from a rattlesnake. Then he does this. Let me know what you thought of this story by giving it a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know if you enjoyed my story and get to know you better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sound of his horse's hooves on the packed earth mingled with the songs of meadowlarks as Samuel Jones decided to take a shortcut through the woods that September morning. At 35, the rancher knew every rock, every tree of that land on the outskirts of Austin, but he had never heard such desperate screams echoing among the dry branches of the Texas scrubland. A woman's voice, harsh and choked with tears, cut through the morning air like a dagger, crying for help, for God's sake, for someone to help her. Samuel spurred his horse, his heart pounding as he followed the sound of despair coming from the direction of the dry creek bed. What he found when he rounded a bend in the trees made his blood run cold. An elderly woman, far too thin, with her grey hair disheveled and her clothes torn, was lying on the rocky ground. Her right leg was visibly injured, bleeding, but the most shocking thing was the fierce determination with which she protected something against her chest. It was a baby. And just a few feet away from them, coiled under a rock, a rattlesnake moved slowly, its triangular head raised in a striking position. Samuel leapt from his horse without hesitation. He grabbed a thick branch from the ground and advanced toward the snake, shouting and hitting the ground until it was startled and slithered away, disappearing among the rocks. Only then did he approach the woman, who looked at him with a mixture of relief and suspicion. He asked if she was okay, if she could move, kneeling beside her. The woman murmured that she thought her leg had broken when she tripped, her voice weak, but that the boy, Leo, was fine. She hadn't let the snake get near him. Samuel looked at the baby in the woman's arms. He couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 months old, was visibly malnourished, with pale skin and chapped lips. His clothes were dirty and torn, but he was breathing, his dark little eyes fixed on the face of the woman protecting him. Samuel asked how they ended up there, taking off his own shirt to improvise a sling for the woman's injured leg, saying the place was dangerous, especially with a child. The woman hesitated, her hands trembling as she held the baby. She said her name was Helen Carter, 67 years old, and this was her grandson Leo. Her voice broke as she explained they had nowhere to go. Samuel frowned, helping her sit up against a tree, and asked if they were from around Austin. Tears began to stream down Helen's wrinkled face. She told him her children had thrown her out of the house the night before. They said she was a burden, that they had no obligation to care for her and the boy. They took her purse, her pension, everything. They only left her with the clothes on her back. A hot anger grew in Samuel's chest. He asked if her own children had done this. She confirmed it was the 3 children she had raised alone after her husband passed, after she was widowed at 30. Helen wiped her nose on her torn sleeve. She had worked as a seamstress her whole life to give them an education, a home, food. And when they found out she had spent her savings on medicine for Leo, who was sick, her voice failed completely. The baby started to cry, a weak, broken cry. Helen rocked him against her chest, humming an old lullaby, but Samuel could see she was at the end of her strength. Her skin was sallow. There were purple bruises on her arms that looked like marks of violence, and her lips were dry and cracked. He asked how long they had been out there, taking his canteen of water and offering it to her. She said since yesterday, she thought. She'd lost track of time. She had tried to get to her friend's house in town but got lost in the dark. When dawn came, her leg was already hurting badly, and then the snake appeared. Samuel made a decision that would change his life forever. He would take them to his ranch. He said she needed medical care, and so did the baby. Helen protested, trying to get up and groaning in pain, saying she couldn't accept that he didn't know them and couldn't get involved in other people's problems. Samuel replied firmly that he wasn't getting involved in any problem. He was just doing what any decent person would do, already thinking about how to get them both on the horse. But as he helped Helen onto the horse's back holding Leo, Samuel couldn't help but wonder what he was really doing. For 5 years, ever since his parents had passed away in a car accident on the highway between Austin and Dallas, he had lived alone on the family ranch. He had grown accustomed to the silence, to the solitary routine of caring for the cattle and the crops. His only constant companions were his employees, simple men who respected his need for isolation. Now, suddenly, he was bringing home a strange woman and a baby who he wasn't sure would survive another day without proper medical care. But something about the way Helen had protected Leo from the snake, putting her own life at risk, had touched a deep chord in his heart. The journey to the ranch took 40 minutes, with Samuel guiding the horse slowly so as not to hurt Helen further. Along the way, she told him more of her story, her voice weak but determined. She confessed that Leo wasn't her grandson by blood, just as they were spotting the main house of the ranch. He was the son of a 17-year-old girl who had died in childbirth. The father fled when he heard about the pregnancy. The paternal grandmother wanted nothing to do with the child. Samuel's heart tightened. He asked how the baby ended up with her. She explained that she used to volunteer at the city orphanage. When she saw that small, sick baby being rejected by everyone, she couldn't leave him there. She lied to her children, said he was her grandson, that the daughter of a distant cousin had. Well, she made up a story. Samuel asked if her children found out the truth. They did when they had to get the documents to register him at the health clinic. They were furious. They said she was going crazy in her old age, that they had no obligation to support a boy who wasn't even family. When they saw how much she had spent on medicine and diapers, Helen sighed heavily. Karen, her eldest daughter, said she was a senile old woman who was being deceived, as if choosing to care for a child was a sign of madness. When they arrived at the ranch, Samuel called Old Joe, his oldest employee, to help. The 50-year-old man who had worked there since Samuel's father's time received the visitors without asking questions, but Samuel noticed the worried look he gave Helen and the baby. Old Joe said quietly, as he helped the woman off the horse, that she needed a doctor urgently, and so did the baby, that they were in very bad shape. Samuel nodded and told him to call Dr. Matthews and say it was an emergency. While they waited for the doctor, Samuel settled Helen in the guest room of the main house, a simple but clean room that hadn't been used in years. Old Joe brought warm water and clean towels, and his wife, Connie, appeared with chicken soup and warm milk for the baby. Connie, a robust 45-year-old woman who handled the cleaning and cooking for the ranch, commented that it had been a long time since she'd seen such a small baby in the house, not since Samuel himself was a child. Helen looked around the room with an expression of astonishment and suspicion. She asked why he was doing this, that he didn't know her, didn't know if he could trust her. Samuel replied, sitting in a chair beside the bed, that she had protected a child from a venomous snake at the risk of her own life, and that told him everything he needed to know about her character. She argued that she had lied to her own children about Leo. He countered that she had saved an abandoned child, and if that was a lie, so be it. Samuel looked at the baby, who had stopped crying after drinking some milk. He said that sometimes we lie to protect those we love. Dr. Matthews arrived an hour later, a man of 60 who had known Samuel since he was a child. After examining Helen and Leo, he called the rancher for a private conversation in the hallway. The doctor explained that her leg wasn't broken, but she had a deep cut that needed stitches. The bigger problem was severe malnutrition. This woman hadn't been eating properly for weeks, maybe months, and the baby, Dr. Matthews told Samuel the child was at his limit. A few more days without proper care, and he didn't know if he would have survived. Samuel declared they would stay there until they recovered. The doctor asked if he was sure that it wasn't just a matter of a few days. The woman would need care for several weeks, and the baby, well, Babies need constant attention. Samuel looked out the hallway window, watching old Joe fixing a fence in the pasture. His life had been predictable for 5 years. Every day was the same as the one before. Wake up early, check the cattle, tend to the crops, eat dinner alone, sleep early. It was a peaceful existence, but also an empty one. He finally replied that he was sure. That night, after Dr. Matthews had left and Helen had fallen asleep with Leo in her arms, Samuel sat on the porch of the house, watching the stars over the Texas sky. Connie brought him coffee and sat beside him. She said he had done the right thing, but that people in town would talk. They'd want to know why he brought a strange woman home. He told her to let them talk. She asked what if her children came looking for her, if they wanted to take her back. Samuel thought of the description Helen had given of the violence she had suffered, the purple marks on her arms, the way she had been thrown into the street with a sick baby. He said if they came, they would have to go through him first. Connie smiled. She said he seemed different, that it had been a long time since she'd seen that spark in his eye. But Samuel didn't answer. He was thinking about what Dr. Matthews had said about Helen needing care for several weeks, and he was also thinking about something the woman had muttered while the doctor was tending to her leg, that some things are better left forgotten. There were secrets in that story, and he had a feeling that the coming days would bring revelations that would change much more than just the routine of his lonely ranch. The first 5 days at the ranch revealed a completely different Helen from the fragile woman Samuel had found in the woods. With her leg bandaged but already able to move with the help of an improvised cane, she insisted on helping with the household chores. Even against medical advice, Connie would protest, finding her in the kitchen at 5 in the morning, preparing porridge for Leo, telling her that Dr. Matthews said to rest. Helen would reply that rest was for those who could afford it, that she had worked her whole life and wasn't going to start being a burden to anyone now. But Samuel noticed something strange in her behavior. During the day, Helen was practical and determined, caring for Leo with impressive efficiency. However, at night, especially after 10 o'clock, she became restless, walking through the house and looking nervously out the windows. On the third night, he found her in the living room, sitting in an armchair with Leo in her lap, whispering something he couldn't understand. She was holding an old, yellowed photograph. Examining it in the lamplight, he asked gently if she couldn't sleep so as not to startle her. Helen quickly hid the photograph under Leo's blanket, apologizing if she had made any noise, explaining that the boy was restless. But Leo was sleeping soundly, his breathing regular and calm. Samuel sat in the armchair next to her and asked if she was afraid of something. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She said he didn't understand, that her children wouldn't let this go, especially Karen, that she was capable of anything when she was crossed. He asked what she meant by anything. Helen hesitated, rocking Leo slightly. She explained that Karen had always been difficult, even as a child. When she didn't get what she wanted, she would throw tantrums, break things, and when she grew up, she paused, unconsciously touching a small scar on her neck. When she grew up, the tantrums got worse. Samuel asked if she had ever assaulted her before. Helen confessed it wasn't just her. Robert and Anthony did too. They said she was going crazy, that she was making things up. When she contested any of their decisions about her life or her money, Helen swallowed hard. They would say she needed to be committed to a nursing home. Samuel felt his blood boil. He realized that's why she was so afraid to accept help, thinking he might be like them. She admitted she had thought so, a rich, single man suddenly appearing with an old woman and a baby. She thought it was some kind of trap. He asked if she still thought that. Helen looked around the simple but cozy room, then at Samuel, who waited for her answer with genuine patience. She said that now she thought God had put him in her path, or her in his. The next day, the relative peace was shattered by an unexpected visit. Karen Carter arrived at the ranch in a rusty old van, accompanied by a thin man of about 40 whom Samuel didn't know. Karen's first words when Samuel opened the gate were to ask where her mother was. The 45-year-old woman's face was hardened by time and bitterness, her hair unkempt, and her clothes smelled of cigarettes. Samuel calmly replied that her mother was recovering from her injuries and taking care of a child they had abandoned along with her. Karen laughed with disdain at the word abandoned, saying her mother was senile, that she had taken a strange baby and left home, claiming it was her grandson. They tried to explain it was madness, but she wouldn't listen. Samuel asked if their explanation included assaulting her and throwing her out on the street. The man beside Karen spoke for the first time, introducing himself as Sheriff Evans from town and saying he'd received a report that an elderly woman was being held here against her will. Samuel felt the ground shake beneath his feet. He stated that Mrs. Helen was here because she wanted to be, and they could ask her themselves. The sheriff said that's what they were going to do, that he needed to speak with her in private. When they went to the house, they found Helen in the yard, hanging Leo's diapers on the line. She turned pale upon seeing Karen, instinctively clutching the baby she was holding tighter. Karen shouted, asking what this farce was, questioning why Samuel would bring her and this strange baby to his house and what kind of interest he had in a 67-year-old woman. Helen murmured for Karen to please not make a scene, her voice trembling. Karen shot back, asking if it was a scene that her mother had disappeared from home with a baby that wasn't their relative, and they were worried. Samuel dryly observed that they were worried enough to start looking only a week later. Sheriff Evans approached Helen and said he needed to know if she was there of her own free will or if she had been coerced in any way. Helen looked at Samuel, then at Karen, clearly torn between fear of her daughter and the need to protect Leo. She said she was fine there, that no one had forced her to do anything, but Karen insisted, saying her mother couldn't stay in a stranger's house with a man she didn't know, taking care of a child who wasn't even family. Helen stated firmly that Leo was her grandson. Karen denied it, saying she made it up, that the baby belonged to some girl who died in childbirth. The silence that followed was heavy. Samuel noticed that Helen had grown even paler, and Leo began to cry, as if sensing the tension in the air. The sheriff asked if this was true, if the child was not her biological grandson. Helen took a deep breath, gathering a courage Samuel didn't know she possessed. She said he was not her grandson by blood, but he was her grandson by heart, and he was under her protection. Karen called it ridiculous, saying her mother had no legal right to the child. Helen's voice rose for the first time since Samuel had met her, asking if they had the right to beat her and throw her on the street, if they had the right to steal her pension and leave her without medicine. Karen turned red, protesting that they didn't steal anything, they just took the money because she was spending it all on nonsense. Helen held up the baby, asking if medicine for a sick child was nonsense. Karen retorted that it was a child who was not their responsibility. Helen shouted, surprising everyone, that he was her responsibility, that she chose to care for him when no one else would. Sheriff Evans watched the argument with growing interest. He asked Karen if she could prove these accusations about her mother spending money inappropriately. She said of course she could. She had the receipts from the pharmacy, for the diapers, for the special milk. The sheriff pointed out that these were receipts that proved she was adequately caring for a child, and he saw no crime in that. Karen was clearly annoyed by the turn of events. She insisted to the sheriff that her mother was 67 and showed clear signs of dementia, that she had invented the story about the baby being her grandson. He asked if she had been evaluated by a doctor for this supposed dementia. Before Karen could answer, Helen spoke up, saying Dr. Matthews could confirm she had no mental problems. She was just malnourished due to the abuse she received. The sheriff turned to Karen, asking about the abuse. Karen protested there was no abuse. that her mother was making it up. Samuel interrupted, saying the marks on her body suggested otherwise, and Dr. Matthews had documented everything. The sheriff made some notes in his pad. He said he would need to talk to the doctor and also needed to better understand the child's legal situation. Karen said the situation was simple. The baby was abandoned and her mother took him illegally. He had to be returned to the orphanage. Helen cried out no, hugging Leo tightly, saying he would die there. He was already close to dying when she took him. Karen insisted it wasn't their problem. Helen declared that it was a problem for anyone with a heart. Samuel watched the argument with growing admiration for Helen. The fragile, scared woman he had found in the woods was showing a fierce courage in defending Leo. He told the sheriff that if there were legal issues to be resolved about the child, they should be resolved properly, but he would not allow Mrs. Helen to be taken from there against her will. Karen snarled, asking who he was to stop them and what interest he had in an old woman with a strange baby. He replied it was the interest of a decent human being in protecting vulnerable people. The sheriff closed his notepad. He said he would investigate the situation further, and for now, Mrs. Helen could stay where she was, as long as it was of her own free will. But he would need all involved parties to come to the station by the end of the week for clarification. After Karen and the sheriff left, Helen sat down heavily in a chair in the yard, still holding Leo. Her hands were visibly trembling. She murmured that Karen would find a way to hurt her, that she always gets what she wants, and now she wanted to get rid of her and Leo. Samuel sat beside her and asked why she had so much hatred. Helen was silent for a long time, watching the clouds forming in the afternoon sky. Finally, she took out the photograph she had hidden the night before. She said softly it was because she was not her biological daughter, and she had always known it. Samuel looked at the photograph. It showed two identical women holding babies in their arms, both smiling for the camera. He asked if they were twins. She confirmed it was her and her sister Esther, and the photo was taken 45 years ago when their babies were born in the same week. Helen pointed to one of the women. Esther passed away in childbirth a few days later. Her baby survived, but had no acknowledged father. The whole family pressured for the child to be given up for adoption. Samuel asked if she had raised both children. She had. Karen never knew she wasn't her biological daughter, but she always had an anger inside her that Helen couldn't explain, as if she sensed something was wrong, that she didn't belong to that family. Samuel studied the photograph more closely and asked about Leo, why she was so sure she should care for him. Helen smiled for the first time since Karen's arrival. She said that when she saw him at the orphanage, he had the same expression Karen had as a baby, the same eyes, the same way of crying. She paused, looking at the sleeping boy. She thought Leo might be Esther's great-grandson, the child of some descendant of hers who was also abandoned. Samuel asked if she was sure. She said she wasn't sure of anything, only that when she saw him, she felt the same thing she felt when she first held Karen in her arms, and if she was right. Helen looked directly at Samuel. If she was right, Karen was trying to stop her from saving her own blood relative. That night, while Helen finally managed to sleep peacefully with Leo, Samuel lay awake, thinking about the complexity of the situation he had involved himself in. A woman who had raised a daughter who didn't know she was adopted, now fighting to protect a child who could be a distant relative, facing a family that rejected her and a system that questioned her decisions. And he, a lonely rancher who had spent 5 years avoiding emotional complications, now found himself at the center of a family drama that promised to become much more complex before it was resolved. Sheriff Evans's investigation brought revelations no one expected. 3 days after Karen's visit, he returned to the ranch with a grave expression and a folder full of documents. He said he needed to talk to all of them, sitting down in the living room as Helen nervously rocked Leo. Samuel served coffee to everyone, noticing how Helen's hands trembled as she held the cup. In recent days, she had become increasingly anxious, waking up several times during the night to check if Leo was breathing. The sheriff began consulting his papers, first about Mrs. Helen. Dr. Matthews had confirmed there were no signs of dementia. What she had were symptoms of severe malnutrition and chronic emotional stress. Helen murmured that she told them she wasn't crazy. The sheriff added that he had also spoken with her neighbors. 3 people confirmed they had seen episodes of aggression from her children in recent months. Samuel leaned forward, asking what kind of episodes. The sheriff mentioned shouting, pushing, and on one occasion, Robert Carter was seen forcibly dragging his mother back into the house when she tried to go to the clinic with the baby. Helen lowered her eyes, saying they claimed she was spending too much money on doctors, that a poor child didn't need so much care. This brought them to the second discovery, the sheriff continued, about Leo. The story she had told was correct. He was the son of Amanda Smith, 17, who died from complications in childbirth 5 months ago. The father was Leo Peterson, 18, who fled town when he heard about the pregnancy. Samuel asked about the girl's family. That's where things got interesting, the sheriff said, pulling a birth certificate from the folder. Amanda Smith was the daughter of Noosa Smith, who in turn was the daughter of, he paused dramatically, Esther Carter. The silence that followed was absolute. Helen turned as pale as paper, her free hand flying to her chest. She whispered that Esther Carter was her twin sister. The sheriff confirmed it, which meant that Leo was her great-nephew, a legitimate blood relative. Samuel watched Helen process this information. Tears began to stream down her face, but this time they were tears of relief, not despair. She murmured that she knew it, that when she saw him at the orphanage, she knew there was something familiar about him, the eyes, the way he cried, just like Karen as a baby. Speaking of Karen, the sheriff said there was something else he needed to tell them. She and her brothers were in serious financial trouble. Robert had lost his job 6 months ago and was 3 months behind on rent. Anthony had his workshop closed for debt. Her pension was the family's only stable income. Helen understood now why they were so furious when she spent her money on Leo. But there was something they didn't know, the sheriff continued with a small smile. She had a legal right to care for Leo as his closest relative. More importantly, the child's paternal grandmother, who had abandoned him at the orphanage, had signed a document renouncing any rights to him. Samuel felt enormous relief wash over him. He asked if this meant Helen could officially keep Leo. It meant she already had that right. She just needed to regularize the situation with the family court. Helen began to cry harder, hugging Leo. She asked if he was really hers, if she could care for him without fear of someone taking him away. The sheriff confirmed she could, but he hesitated. There was a complication. Her children were trying to file a motion to declare her mentally incompetent. If they succeeded, they could take custody of Leo and... Samuel finished the thought with anger. Or sell that custody to someone, or return the child to the orphanage to be free of responsibility. Exactly, the sheriff said. Helen stood up abruptly, nearly dropping Leo. She declared they couldn't do that she wasn't crazy. The sheriff said he knew, but they had hired a lawyer and would allege that she had erratic behavior, that she was living in an irregular situation here at the ranch. Samuel was getting more and more irritated, questioning the term irregular situation, stating she was being properly cared for. The sheriff agreed, but explained they would argue that a 67-year-old woman couldn't live in the house of a 35-year-old single man without it raising suspicions about the nature of their relationship. Samuel's indignation exploded. He questioned what kind of sick mind would think of such a thing, that Helen was there because he offered help when she needed it. The sheriff said he believed him, but in court, appearances mattered as much as facts. That night, after the sheriff left, Samuel and Helen talked late into the night about the available options. Leo slept peacefully in her lap, oblivious to the drama surrounding his small existence. Helen said that if she went back to town, they would manage to have her committed. Karen knew people at City Hall had influence, and she had no money to hire a lawyer. Samuel told her not to worry about a lawyer, he would pay. Helen said she couldn't accept that. He had already helped her so much. Samuel said firmly that in the last 10 days, this house had had more life than in the last 5 years, that she had brought something he didn't even know was missing. She asked what he meant. Samuel got up and walked to the window, looking at the starry sky. He explained that his mother died when he was 15. His father was a good man, but very quiet. After he also passed, he got used to the silence. He thought he liked the solitude. She asked, and now he wakes up in the morning and hears her singing to Leo in the kitchen. He hears the sound of him playing with spoons. He sits down for dinner and is no longer alone. He turned to her. He said she and Leo had given him a family he didn't even know he wanted. Helen wiped tears from her eyes. She said he had saved them too if he hadn't shown up in those woods. He said, but he did, and now they would fight together to keep their family united. 2 days later, the situation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Matthews arrived at the ranch with a visitor. It was a tall man, about 60, dressed simply but with a dignified bearing that commanded attention. The doctor introduced him as Nathan Peterson, saying he had important information about Leo. The man approached carefully, observing the baby in Helen's lap. He introduced himself as Nathan, uncle of Leo Peterson, the boy who had fled when he learned Amanda was pregnant. Helen instinctively hugged Leo tighter, asking what he wanted. He wanted to ask for forgiveness for his nephew's cowardice, and he also wanted to meet his great-nephew. Nathan sat in a nearby chair, maintaining a respectful distance. He explained that he and his wife couldn't have children, and when they learned that his nephew had left a child behind, Samuel stood protectively beside Helen, asking if they wanted to take Leo away. Nathan surprisingly said no. They wanted to help care for him. He saw that she loved him as if he were her own grandson, and after talking with Dr. Matthews and Sheriff Evans, they understood the boy was in good hands. Helen suspiciously asked what he was proposing. He suggested an extended family. He and his wife were financially comfortable and could help with medical expenses, education, clothes, and in return, they would like to be a presence in his life. As great uncles, Dr. Matthews spoke up, explaining that Nathan had approached him because he was worried about the action Helen's children were taking and wanted to offer legal support as well. Samuel asked what kind of support. Nathan explained he had a good lawyer in Austin, someone specialized in family matters, and if Mrs. Helen accepted, he could hire him to defend her. Helen looked at Leo, then at Samuel, clearly divided. She said she didn't know. She didn't want Leo to be raised thinking he had to choose between different families. Nathan assured her it wouldn't be like that. They wanted him to grow up knowing he had many people who loved him. Her as his adoptive grandmother, he and his wife as great aunts and uncles, Samuel as the generous person who offered a home to them both. That night, an informal meeting formed in the ranch kitchen. Helen, Samuel, Dr. Matthews, and Nathan discussed the next steps, while Leo slept peacefully in his improvised crib. Dr. Matthews explained the strategy was simple. They would prove that Mrs. Helen was mentally capable, had family and financial support to care for Leo, and that removing the child from the current environment would be detrimental to his development. Nathan asked about her children. Samuel said with a fierce smile that they were in for a surprise. He had discovered some interesting things about their finances. It seemed Robert had been embezzling money from the company where he worked before being fired, and Anthony owed taxes for 3 years. Helen asked how he found that out. He said he had contacts in the region, and when someone messes with his family, he gets informed. Helen smiled for the first time in days, asking if he meant his family. He corrected her, our family, looking at Leo, and said that no one was going to destroy what they had built here. But none of them knew that at that exact moment, Karen was in a meeting with her brothers and a lawyer of dubious reputation, planning a strategy that would involve much more serious accusations against Samuel and Helen, accusations that, if pursued, could destroy not only the family they had formed, but also the reputation Samuel had built over a lifetime in the area. The storm that Karen and her brothers tried to create collapsed upon themselves spectacularly. On the morning of the hearing that was supposed to decide the fate of Helen and Leo, the lawyer hired by Nathan arrived with evidence that completely changed the course of the proceedings. The man of 50, dressed in discreet elegance, introduced himself as Mr. Edward Vasconcelos, stating he had some documents that would greatly interest the judge. The hearing took place in the small county courthouse, in a room that could barely hold everyone involved. Helen held Leo, now 8 months old and visibly healthier, while Samuel stood by her side as a support witness. On the other side, Karen, Robert and Anthony huddled with their lawyer, a nervous man who seemed to have realized he had underestimated the situation. Mr. Vasconcelos began by stating to His Honor that his clients had come today to prove that Mrs. Helen Carter was fully capable of caring for her great-nephew, Leo Smith. But first, they needed to address some serious issues regarding the conduct of the plaintiffs. The judge, Dr. Hector Mendez, a serious man of 60 who knew the local families well, adjusted his glasses and told him to proceed. The lawyer stated that Mrs. Helen's children alleged she was mentally incapacitated and living in an irregular situation, yet they had medical reports attesting to her full mental capacity, as well as documents proving she was a victim of domestic violence and misappropriation of funds by these same children. Karen jumped up abruptly, claiming it was a lie, that they took care of their mother. The judge ordered her to sit, stating he would hear all parties. Mr. Vasconcelos continued, spreading documents on the table. He presented proof that Robert Carter had embezzled $15, who drew zero from his former employer, that Anthony Carter owed $8,000 in taxes and had his workshop closed for tax evasion, and that Karen Carter was caught forging her mother's signature to withdraw her pension without authorization. The silence in the room was absolute. Karen's lawyer fidgeted with his papers, clearly not expecting these revelations. Furthermore, Mr. Vasconcelos added, they had depositions from 5 neighbors who witnessed physical aggression against Mrs. Helen, including an occasion when she was forcibly prevented from taking Leo to the doctor when he had a high fever. Helen hugged the baby tighter, remembering that terrible day when Karen had pushed her against the wall for insisting on seeking medical help for Leo. The judge addressed Karen's lawyer, asking if his clients had anything to say about these accusations. The man stammered a confused response about misunderstandings and financial pressures, but it was clear there was no possible defense for the evidence presented. Mr. Vasconcelos then addressed Mrs. Helen's current situation. She lived on the ranch of Mr. Samuel Jones, a man of impeccable reputation in the community, who offered her shelter when she was brutally expelled from her home. She had medical support from Dr. Matthews, financial support from Mr. Nathan Peterson, the child's great-uncle, and most importantly, she had shown exemplary care for Leo. Dr. Matthews was called to testify and confirmed the remarkable recovery of both Helen and Leo. He stated that when he first met them, both were in a critical state of malnutrition, but today Leo was a healthy and active baby, and Mrs. Helen had completely recovered her physical and emotional health. Nathan also testified, explaining his decision to support Helen. He said that when his nephew abandoned his responsibilities, this courageous lady took on the care of the child, and he saw in her a dedicated mother, and in Mr. Samuel, a man of character who offered his home to protect a family in need. The most emotional moment came when Samuel was called to testify. He told His Honor that 4 months ago, his life changed completely when he found Mrs. Helen and Leo lost in the woods. He didn't make the decision to help them thinking about legal consequences or what people would say. He did it because it was the right thing to do. The judge asked what his intention was now. His intention, he said, was to continue offering them a home for as long as they wanted to stay. Helen had become like a mother to him, and Leo like the son he never had. They were a family, albeit an unconventional one. Karen tried one last desperate move. She told the judge her mother was 67 and questioned how she could raise a child at that age, and she pointed to Samuel, a single man living with an elderly woman, asking what kind of example that was for a child. It was then that something no one expected happened. Helen asked for permission to speak and stood up with Leo in her arms. She told His Honor that her children were right about one thing. She was 67 and indeed getting old. But when she found Leo in the orphanage, abandoned and sick, she saw in him the same need she saw in Karen 45 years ago. Karen turned pale, asking what need she was talking about. Helen took a deep breath and made the bravest decision of her life. She spoke of the need of an abandoned child who needs love, just like Karen needed when her real mother, her twin sister Esther, passed away in childbirth, and she decided to raise her as her own daughter. The shock in the room was palpable. Karen stood up, staggering, asking what she was saying. Helen said she was telling her that she was not her biological daughter, but the daughter of her sister Esther, who died in childbirth. She raised her as if she were her own, because that's what love commanded her to do, exactly as she was doing with Leo. Karen screamed that it was a lie, but her voice was broken. Helen took the old photograph from her purse, stating this was the proof that she and Leo were distant cousins, both descendants of Esther, which is why when she saw him, she knew immediately she had to care for him. The judge examined the photograph and the genealogical documents that Mr. Vasconcelos had prepared. After a few minutes, he spoke. It was clear to him that Mrs. Helen had acted out of love and protection for a vulnerable child. It was equally clear that she had full mental capacity and adequate family support to continue caring for Leo. As for the plaintiff's accusations about an irregular situation, he saw nothing but an unconventional family formed through human solidarity. He paused, looking sternly at Karen and her brothers, and added that the evidence of domestic violence and misappropriation of funds was serious and would be forwarded for criminal investigation. The final decision was that Helen would retain custody of Leo, with official support from Nathan as a secondary legal guardian and Samuel as responsible for their residence. Karen, Robert, and Anthony would leave the hearing facing not only the loss of control over their mother's life, but also possible criminal charges. After the hearing, on the porch of the ranch, a new family routine was established. Leo, now crawling and drooling on everything he found, played on the rug while the adults talked. Leo babbled something in his baby language, making everyone laugh. Nathan, who had become a constant presence at the ranch, observed that he was trying to talk. His wife, Mercedes, came twice a week to help with Leo and had become great friends with Helen. Samuel asked Helen if she thought Karen would ever get over all this, watching her play with Leo. She replied that it would take time, that finding out at 45 that your whole life was based on a hidden truth wasn't easy, but she had offered to talk with her when she was ready. He asked how she felt, having told the truth after so many years. Helen smiled, picking Leo up as he crawled to her. She felt free. For 45 years, she had carried the weight of a secret, thinking she was protecting Karen. But secrets have a way of poisoning relationships. 6 months later, the ranch had been completely transformed. Nathan had financed the construction of an annex where he and Mercedes stayed when they visited. Dr. Matthews had become a constant presence, not just as the family doctor, but as a friend who played cards with Samuel on Sunday afternoons. Leo, now over a year old, was taking his first wobbly steps around the yard, always under the watchful eye of Helen, who had completely regained the vivacity lost during years of mistreatment. Nathan asked Samuel one afternoon if he regretted changing his life so drastically. As they watched Leo try to catch a chick in the yard, Samuel replied with a smile that his life hadn't changed. It had finally begun. The biggest surprise came one December morning when Karen appeared at the ranch gate. She was different, thinner, her hair cut, clothes simple but clean. She came alone. She hesitantly asked if she could speak with Helen. The conversation took place on the porch, with Leo playing nearby, oblivious to the emotional tension of the moment. Karen asked for forgiveness for the aggression and greed, explained that she was in therapy and trying to rebuild her life. She said she wanted to know her real story and she wanted to meet her cousin Leo if she would let her. Helen replied that he was her blood relative and there would always be a place for her there as long as she came with respect and love. The following year brought complete stability to the unconventional family. Leo grew up surrounded by love, developing with health and joy. Helen, at 68, had found a new purpose in life. Samuel discovered that the loneliness he thought he liked was actually a fear of committing again. Nathan and Mercedes became dedicated adoptive grandparents, helping with education and providing experiences a child from the region would rarely have. Dr. Matthews continued to look after everyone's health, but mostly he had become the uncle doctor every family needs. And Karen, slowly, was rebuilding a relationship with the woman who had raised her as a daughter. They started with monthly visits, which became bi-weekly, then weekly. She learned to treat Helen with the respect she had denied her for decades. 2 years after that encounter in the woods, Helen asked Samuel what the biggest lesson she had learned was. They were watching Leo play with a mutt that had appeared at the ranch and been adopted by the family. He asked what it was. She said that family isn't about blood or obligation, it's about choice and love. She chose to care for Karen as a baby, chose to care for Leo when he was abandoned, and he chose to care for both of them when they needed it most. He said he would choose it again as many times as necessary. Leo ran to them, laughing and talking in his 2-year-old language. Helen picked him up, and he snuggled against her with the total trust that only loved children possess. In that moment, watching the sunset over the hills, Samuel understood that he had found his greatest wealth. It wasn't in the land he owned, the cattle he raised, or the money he had. It was in the people who chose to form a family with him, united not by ties of blood, but by ties of love, protection, and solidarity. The ranch that had once housed only a lonely man now echoed with laughter, conversation, music, and life, and at the center of it all, an orphan boy who had been saved by a brave woman, who in turn had been saved by a generous man, all discovering that the most beautiful endings are the ones we build with our own hands, choosing to love when it would be easier to just move on. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.